In 2006, 123 inmates disappeared from 3 federal prisons in the American South. The official explanation? Transfer. The real story? They never left the grounds. They didn't die. They were deleted. You're listening to someone who served under 3 administrations. I've seen the logs. I've held the hard drives they thought were destroyed. And I've read the memos that should never have been written. Here's what happened. Between May 4th and May 9th of 2006, 3 high-security prisons, Angola in Louisiana, Pollock in central Louisiana, and Beaumont in Texas, submitted standard reports of inmate transfers. No red flags. No media coverage. No family notifications. Just a quiet shift of bodies on paper. But when we checked the movement logs, something didn't add up. There were no buses. No planes. No facility receipts. No actual transport of any kind. 123 men, all with violent criminal histories, high trauma profiles, and no outside ties, were scrubbed from the system. Clean. I was stationed at Fort Meade at the time, monitoring encrypted transmissions tagged under a black channel frequency we referred to as Shadow 6. It was only supposed to ping military coordinates. But for 3 days straight, it was active near civilian correctional facilities. When we cracked the headers, a name kept repeating, Zone 23. That's not a prison. That's not a jurisdiction. It's a project. And it was never meant to surface. Zone 23 was a covert behavioral field experiment, hidden under a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency shell company and funded through a black budget chain labeled C944.79. I only accessed it once, thanks to a credential sync error from a junior analyst who didn't know what she'd logged into. I pulled 14 megabytes of internal files before the system locked me out. They weren't moving inmates. They were testing something. Something called phase mirroring. Here's the idea. If you isolate a subject from all sensory input, no clocks, no sound, no reflection, and then expose them to repeated, time-looped messages while administering a drug that weakens memory consolidation, you can do something terrifying. You can convince a person that implanted beliefs are their own. You can make them forget what they believed before. And in some cases, you can make them someone else entirely. They weren't erasing memory. They were installing identity. In the recordings, the men stop using their real names. They start referring to themselves by assigned numbers. They lose the ability to describe events from their own lives. One even claimed, and I quote, "He's not in here anymore. I'm just what's left." Subject Z23-017. Male. 29 years old. No next of kin. No one asking questions. That's what made these men ideal. No one was going to miss them. And no one was supposed to notice. But I noticed. The Department of Justice quietly filed a correction in a 2007 audit. You can still find it, if you know where to look. It says, and I'm quoting, "Anomalies in documentation due to clerical misalignment during hurricane relief efforts." Only, there was no hurricane. And those documents weren't misaligned. They were erased. Zone 23 didn't shut down. It was sold off. To a defense contractor. Renamed. Relocated. And rebooted under private funding. You want to know the worst part? They're not just using prisoners anymore. And if you've ever spent time in a facility that didn't appear on your discharge paperwork, you might have already been inside Zone 23. End of Episode 1. Next time, I'll tell you how I found the footage they tried to burn. And why 3 people died to get it out. Stay alert. Stay paranoid. This isn't over. They thought they erased everything. Transport logs. Surveillance feeds. Session transcripts. But they missed one copy. because of a mislabeled external drive buried inside a shipment manifest for Fort Huachuca. That drive was meant to be destroyed. Instead, it ended up in a backlog of seized digital evidence, an overflow room the agency nicknamed the Swamp. I pulled it by accident. But what I saw changed everything. The footage was low resolution, time-stamped May 8, 2006, 2200 hours. Interior: small white room. No windows. Single-mounted camera. A man sits in the center, hands cuffed to a steel table. He stares forward, motionless. Then he begins to speak. But not to the camera. To someone, or something, no one else can see. His mouth moves in sync with himself. Frame by frame, I watched. He speaks. Then repeats the same sentence, exactly, 3 seconds later. Then again, in perfect mimicry, tone, rhythm, everything, but with a slight variation in his eyes. They dart left, before he says the line. Then right, before the mirror version says it back. Not a reflection. Not playback. A loop. A delay. And then, a shift. On the 8th loop, his lips move, but the audio comes first. As if something else said it through him. I slowed it down. Analyzed the waveform. Each loop contained tiny frequency deviations, fluctuations too precise to be human speech. Machine-coded markers. Embedded in his voice. Phase mirroring wasn't just cognitive. It was transmitting something. They were using these men like radios. File name, zone23_test_017A_repeater. I searched the internal archive. Only 2 other files referenced that naming structure. Both were flagged for destruction. I recovered one. It was a transcription log from a medical tech stationed in the same facility. Date, May 9, 2006. Here's part of what she wrote. Subject asked if I remembered the war in Colorado. I told him there was no war. He said, "There will be. You already lost." He wasn't confused. He smiled when he said it. Later, she was found dead in her apartment. Ruled a suicide. But the tox report showed no drugs, no alcohol, no trauma. Her brain scans? Blank. Literally. No active neural patterns. Like someone unplugged the consciousness, but left the body behind. So I dug deeper. I traced where the drive originated, a mobile data unit labeled Hound 6. I know that name. It's not standard logistics. Hound units were deployed during psychotronic field experiments. Part of the old Mirrorhound doctrine. That wasn't a nickname. It was a directive. Here's what they did. They ran repeating audio loops into a subject's subconscious. At first, it caused disassociation. Then identity confusion. Then, response splitting. The subject would begin to hear his own thoughts coming from somewhere else. Somewhere behind the mirror, as one report put it. Eventually, he'd obey the voice, even when it contradicted his own instincts. You know what that means? You don't need to control people physically. Just make them think the order was theirs. That footage I found? It was deleted from every mainframe 48 hours later. But I made a copy. 2, actually. One sitting in a safe house across the border. The other is in the hands of someone I haven't spoken to since we buried the technician who leaked it to me. He used to work for DARPA. He told me something that still keeps me up at night. He said, the loops weren't just for the prisoners. They were test runs for something bigger. They're scaling it now. Through consumer tech. Through content. You ever hear a phrase in your head that doesn't feel like yours? That's not a coincidence. That's Zone 23, reaching out. And it's just getting started. They called him Subject 026. I called him by the name I saw scratched into the wall of his cell. Calder. That name doesn't appear in any Bureau of Prisons database. No sentencing record. No arrest file. No birth certificate. But I've seen the footage. And I've read the notes left by the doctor who interviewed him, 3 days before the entire facility where he was held burned to the ground. This wasn't a man having visions. This was someone remembering the future. The interview begins normally. The psychologist asks his name. No response. She asks if he knows where he is. He says, "No, but I know where you're going to be, Tuesday." She pauses. Thinks it's sarcasm. Then he says her exact Starbucks order, down to the misspelling on the cup. Then tells her she'll spill it on her blouse. Which she does. 2 days later. It's all in the logs. But that wasn't the part that broke protocol. It's what came next. In his second session, Calder described a town. A bridge collapse. He gave the name of the engineer. Described the vehicles that would be on it when it failed. Said the bolts were fake. Swapped out to fail under strain, he said. The psychologist flagged it as delusion. 2 weeks later, the bridge in Ashburn, Georgia collapsed. 6 dead. Same cars. Same engineer. None of that was in the official report. Because by then, Calder had been moved. No one could say where. The document stopped there. But not the story. Because 4 years later, I ran into someone in a deep storage asset review, a handler from a civilian contractor. She remembered Calder. She said he didn't just predict. He would wake up screaming names of people who hadn't died yet. Then they'd show up on morgue lists days later. She asked her supervisor if he was being fed intel from an outside source. The answer she got? No. He's not remembering our plans. He's remembering the next version of them. Zone 23 was built to test identity overwrite. But Calder, he broke through it. Instead of collapsing under the program, his mind started storing fragments of possible timelines. Possibilities. Loops that hadn't finished yet. He wasn't supposed to retain them. But he did. And once he did, he started warning people. That's when they shut it down. Or pretended to. Here's the part that was never entered into the system. I found it in a handwritten log. Stashed inside a copy of Applied Neural Control Systems, 3rd edition, in a locked case at Fort Detrick. It said, Calder began describing elements from loops he was never exposed to. Project Doorframe. Mirrorhound overlap. Claimed he had already seen us try to terminate him. Claimed it didn't work. Claimed he'd already been here, 3 times. They tried sedating him. Didn't work. They tried isolation. He started writing on the floor, in reverse mirror text, things no one had told him. Final note, dated 1 day before the fire, terminate Subject 026. Directive from upper command, the memory is unstable. The future is leaking. Here's the part that matters. I found Calder's handwriting again. Not in the archives. On a street sign in Austin, Texas. Scratched into the back of a power box, same letters, same phrasing. 3 words. It already happened. If Calder survived, he's not hiding. He's waiting. Because if you can remember a future that hasn't happened yet, you don't run from it. You prepare for it. The Pentagon has 6 independent power redundancies. If one goes down, 5 more take over. That's why no one could explain what happened on October 12, 2010, when every system went dark for 9 minutes. No attack. No weather. No grid failure. Just 9 minutes, of nothing. What they told the press was a software glitch. What really happened? Something woke up beneath the building. The incident was classified as a Level 7 containment breach. I had moved into private intel contracting by then, risk management for a firm that handled exfiltration scenarios during black-budget drills. When the alert went out, I received a cold channel transmission. No voice. Just a phrase, Zone 23 active. Initiate failsafe 4B. That channel hadn't been used since 2006. 4B was a lock sequence protocol for internal threat quarantine. Not for missiles. Not for cyber attacks. For people. Here's what I was able to reconstruct. Underneath the Pentagon is a structure few people know about, not the sublevels you can tour, not the data vaults listed in budget line items. I'm talking about a sealed unit called Subsurface Annex Echo, buried below the primary structure, not on any architectural plan dated post-1968. It was mothballed in the 70s. At least, that's what we were told. But that night in 2010, someone, or something, triggered a manual override from inside it. Security logs went offline. Door access resynced to a protocol called Hound Mirror, which hasn't existed on paper since Project Mirrorhound was terminated. Here's what we believe happened. A phase mirror subject was being held in the annex, one of the early Zone 23 test cases. Subject designation, Zeta 9. Age unknown. Gender unknown. Control status, unstable. There's no footage from the incident. But there are sound logs. Distorted. Fragmented. One of the guards assigned to the level was wearing a body mic. The audio picks up breathing, then silence, then this, "You don't remember putting me here. But I remember every time you tried to take me out." The file cuts. And then, nothing for 9 minutes. At minute 9, power restored. But something had changed. The door to the annex, which had been sealed shut with 6-inch steel, was open. No signs of forced entry. No bodies inside. Just a single object left in the center of the room, a mirror. Face down. And written on the back, etched with something sharp, "This version ends here." 3 days later, an internal Pentagon memo was circulated, red ink, executive eyes only. Title, Zone 23 Overlap Event. The memo stated, Subject Zeta 9 entered external memory bleed. Local time distortion observed. Recommend shutdown of all remaining phase mirror trials. But they didn't shut it down. They moved it. They called it something else. Split the research across 3 private defense contractors. One of them you'd recognize by name, because they make the biometric scanners used in over 140 U.S. airports. Another one builds software for school testing platforms. And the third? They own a chain of meditation apps. Why does that matter? Because Phase Mirror wasn't just about identity control. It was about event synchronization. If you can sync enough people to the same perception, even if it's false, reality conforms around it. One truth. One version. Reinforced by emotion, feedback loops, and repetition. That's why they needed power shut off during the breach. Zeta 9 wasn't just escaping. They were overriding. You ever walk into a room and feel like you were supposed to remember something? You ever see a headline and think, wait, didn't that already happen? Maybe it didn't. Maybe it did, in a version that got replaced. All I know is this, that night, something came up from beneath the Pentagon. And whatever it was, it still remembers the version we forgot. Facility 12 wasn't on any official site map. It was built inside a decommissioned missile silo in northern New Mexico, 73 miles from the nearest town, 2 miles beneath the surface. Its purpose? Officially, data recovery and AI training for Department of Energy defense systems. Unofficially, it was where they sent the ones who couldn't be stabilized. The subjects from early Zone 23 trials. The broken mirrors. Most never made it past week 3. Except one. In 2011, a security engineer named Jalen Marsh smuggled out a single magnetic tape, a reel-to-reel backup pulled from a forgotten analog stack deep inside Sublevel 4. He didn't know what was on it. He thought it was archival. Old psych interviews. Data trash. Then he played it. 37 minutes and 22 seconds. No music. No ambient noise. Just one voice. Here's how it begins. You think I'm speaking. But I'm not. I already said this. You're just catching up. The voice is male. Calm. Measured. But distorted. Like it's being played slightly off sync with itself, a half-second echo layered behind the original signal. The speaker continues, you told me my memories weren't mine. So I made new ones. Stronger ones. Ones that don't ask permission to exist. You think you can shut this down. But you already tried. And I already watched you fail. Then silence. And after 10 seconds, play this for them. Let them hear what forgetting feels like. Jalen played that tape 3 times. By the third playthrough, he started losing chunks of time. He said it began with small things. Forgetting the way home. Misremembering his own birth date. Then it got worse. He left his phone in the refrigerator. Started calling coworkers by names they didn't recognize. Then he asked his wife why their son was calling him uncle. They don't have a son. Jalen didn't go public. He knew better. Instead, he mailed the tape to a former colleague at the University of Chicago, an expert in pattern recognition and anomalous cognition. The colleague listened to it once. And then disappeared. No forwarding address. Apartment cleared. No bank activity after that week. Gone. I got my hands on a duplicate of that tape in 2014. I didn't play it right away. I wanted to know what I was dealing with. So I ran a spectrographic analysis of the waveform. The results came back with something I've never seen before, and haven't seen since. The waveform mapped almost perfectly to human REM cycle patterns. But compressed. Layered. Like a dream turned into language. Like it was trying to write itself into the listener's mind. That's when I understood. It wasn't a recording. It was a seed. Zone 23 wasn't just about controlling thoughts. It was about embedding a recursive structure, a pattern that loops until it becomes real. And once you hear it, once it gets in, you can't unhear it. Facility 12 was shut down 4 weeks after the tape was smuggled out. But the voice? It keeps surfacing. Buried in audio glitches. Randomized ad placements. Interference on phone lines. Even in white noise machines sold in airport kiosks. They're hiding the voice in plain sight. Because they want you to hear it, without knowing you heard it. Because when enough of us repeat the same version of reality, it becomes true. His designation was MH43. Subject 43 in the Mirrorhound trial phase. One of the later cycles, smarter, cleaner data. He was supposed to fold. Like the rest. But he didn't. He resisted. Not violently. Not outwardly. He resisted by remembering things he was never told. And that scared them more than any outburst. I first saw MH43 in a recovered training session log from a debrief site called Meridian Annex, buried under a converted VA hospital in North Dakota. His file wasn't like the others. Most subjects were violent offenders. Or dissociative patients pulled from military psych units. MH43. No priors. No psychiatric flags. 24 years old. Former linguistics student. Volunteered for a cognitive enhancement study through a research ad on campus. He thought he was being paid for a memory trial. What he got was 3 months of induced identity destabilization, forced isolation, and silent conditioning under the phase mirror model. Most subjects cracked within 6 weeks. MH43 didn't. Instead, he started asking questions. About the staff. About the room. About the version of himself he saw in the looped footage. Here's an excerpt from the log, dated week 7, interviewer. Do you know where you are? MH43, not exactly. But I know it isn't where you think I am. Interviewer, what does that mean? MH43, it means you forgot to reset the reflection in the doorframe camera. I saw myself blink, twice. The interviewer paused. Then wrote one note, subject may be perceiving across cycles. In phase mirror terms, that's a death sentence. Perceiving across cycles means you're not just resisting conditioning, you're noticing patterns between versions. You're remembering things from test loops that were supposed to be wiped. It means the overwrite failed. On day 51, MH43 made a request. He asked for paper and a pen. They gave it to him, out of curiosity. He didn't write threats. Didn't scribble nonsense. He drew diagrams, symbols, and a pattern that later matched up with a visual frequency used in early Zone 23 induction sessions. He wasn't hallucinating. He was decoding. That's when they moved him to red containment. I got access to his final scan report. The neural readout showed something called desynchronization drift, a condition where the subject's brainwaves no longer align with real-time environmental input. But he was still functioning. In fact, he was outperforming cognitive tests compared to the control group. His mind was moving outside the loop, which meant they couldn't control him. 1 week later, he was declared non-responsive. Standard termination notice. Case closed. But there's a note buried in the metadata of the final report, one line, in technician shorthand, 43's not gone. He's somewhere else. We lost signal, not subject. They didn't kill him. They disconnected him. Months later, I reviewed surveillance footage from a closed-door DARPA demo. A test of phase mirror spillover effects. In the background, there's a whiteboard. It shows neural drift charts, behavioral loop maps, and a file name in the corner. MH43.ghostrunner. I looked up that codename. It doesn't exist in any official project log, but it's referenced 3 times in internal communications. Each time, it's next to one word. Unrecoverable. You know what I think? I don't think they lost him. I think MH43 found a way to finish the loop, before they did. I think he saw a version of himself that wasn't controlled, wasn't erased. And he jumped. Out of sync. Out of reach. A memory they couldn't rewrite. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe he's in one of the versions of this world we haven't caught up to yet. But if you've ever looked in a mirror and felt like something was slightly off, like your eyes moved just a half-second too early, you might be brushing up against his signal. You might be standing where he already stood. Her name was Elise Mercer. Officially, Cognitive Risk Analyst, Clearance Level 5. Unofficially, a handler assigned to observe long-term mirror phase test subjects across 3 facilities. Her job wasn't to correct behavior. It was to monitor compliance. To watch for signs of collapse, and report it before it spread. But she didn't just watch. She listened. And what she heard broke the system. Elise started seeing irregularities in 2012. Subject bleed. Dream contamination. Cases where test subjects began recalling experiences from other facilities they'd never set foot in. She documented it. Filed internal alerts. Got nothing back but form replies and password resets. Then something strange happened. She stopped receiving data from her own cases. Subjects were marked neutralized without cause. No video. No transcripts. Just red dots where names used to be. She knew what that meant. They weren't terminated. They were overwritten. That's when she contacted me. She didn't know who else to trust. I'd left the agency 2 years earlier, burned my access, erased my name, disappeared off their radar. Or so I thought. Elise sent me 3 files. Encrypted. Tagged with codenames I recognized from the deep logs: Mirrorhound, Chessboard, Doorframe. All 3 were linked. But one stood out. An audio clip. 17 seconds. No voice, no speech. Just a hum. Constant. Subtle. Below it, something that felt like breathing. But not human. It made my skin crawl. I ran a trace on where the file originated. It wasn't a government node. It was a smart TV inside a halfway house in Denver. A unit registered to a man who'd been listed as Subject 26. Calder. The one who remembered the future. He was still alive. Or, his signal was. Elise knew it too. Her last message to me said, "I think they're not deleting the subjects. I think they're storing them. And I think something else is learning how to wear them." 2 days later, her phone went dark. Not powered off. Erased. MAC address burned, SIM unresponsive, location history gone. The last ping was from a communications relay outside of Provo, Utah. And get this, that relay went offline 6 minutes later. I tried to find her. I reached out to 2 contractors who'd worked in her circle. Both had left the job early. One was living off the grid in Alaska. The other, a former Navy tech, wouldn't speak on the record, but he said one thing: if you're looking for Elise, don't. She didn't disappear. She unplugged. Then he hung up. That phrase stayed with me. Unplugged. Because it's the same term I found buried in the MH-43 logs. The same word in the Zone 23 containment report from the Pentagon blackout. Not dead. Not escaped. Unplugged. As in, taken offline, from this version of reality. Last month, I was sent a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Elise. Standing in front of a mirror. Only, her reflection isn't matching. In the glass, she's turned away. Looking over her shoulder. Right at me. On the back of the photo, written in ink, I still remember. Do you? She's out there. Somewhere beyond the reach of the program. Or maybe deep inside it, hiding in a version they haven't sealed yet. If you ever feel like someone's watching you when you're alone, not hostile, not invasive, just watching, that's not paranoia. That might be her. Because Elise knew the one thing that scared them most: she didn't run. She didn't fight. She observed. And they can't overwrite what you never forget. By the time they ran the last sanctioned trial under Zone 23, most of the original architects were gone. Dead. Disgraced. Or disappeared. The files were fragmented, renamed, scattered across dozens of shell companies. But the protocol stayed intact. Just hidden under a different name, Mirrorhound Sequence 9. And the final test was held somewhere we weren't supposed to find. The site was known as Black Hollow, an unmarked facility in Nevada, 80 miles south of Tonopah Test Range. Officially, it was a biometric stress lab for high-altitude pilots. Unofficially, it was where they pushed the mirror sequence to its endpoint. One subject. One mirror loop. No handler. No debrief. Just constant playback, injected directly into the brainstem via subcranial implants. No breaks. No human interaction. The goal, not to study collapse, but to force a merge. In theory, it would create total integration. The subject would no longer be able to distinguish between self and simulation. The mirror would become them. That's what they wanted. What they didn't expect was for someone to fight back. The subject was listed as X Delta 5. No name. No history. But buried inside a corrupted log, I found a detail they missed. A blood type. AB negative. Only 0.06% of the population. That matches a record from Zone 23's early days, subject MH19. The boy who predicted his own movements. The one they said vanished. He didn't vanish. He was brought back, years later, for the final test. What happened during the 72-hour sequence is still classified. But pieces of the biometric stream were archived accidentally in a Department of Energy system backup. I saw part of it. It's not footage, it's data translated into image bursts. Like glimpses of a consciousness trying to stabilize inside a storm. What I saw, a room with no doors. A figure watching from a mirrored wall. The subject looking directly into the lens, before the camera activates. And then, over and over. I don't belong to this version. You already ran this. I know what comes next. The loop was supposed to erase him. Instead, it woke him up. And at hour 71, the system broke. Black Hollow went offline. The emergency generators kicked in. And the on-site AI, known as Operator 3, issued a protocol no one expected, subject override. Containment denied. Meaning the subject had gained control of the system. He was no longer being simulated. He was running the loop. Response teams were sent. What they found was impossible. The subject's chair was empty. The mirror, shattered inward. And scrawled on the wall, in reverse, this wasn't the last version. The shutdown order came 12 hours later. Zone 23 was officially terminated. Assets dissolved. Staff reassigned. The final report marked the trial as inconclusive, citing hardware corruption due to environmental stress. But we know the truth. They didn't shut it down because it failed. They shut it down because someone made it through. Since then, I've tracked 6 unexplained memory collapse events in 4 countries. All of them tied to individuals who report visions of mirrored rooms, missing time, and voices that finish their thoughts before they speak. They're not random. They're survivors. From the loop. One of them wrote to me last year. No return address. Just a note. 7 words, he's still out there. And he remembers. You've been listening. Maybe out of curiosity. Maybe out of fear. But the real reason is simpler, because part of you already knows. You've felt it before, that quiet wrongness in a room. That flicker of memory that doesn't match the timeline. That face you recognize, but can't name. This was never about inmates. Or handlers. Or shutdowns. This was about you. Zone 23 was not an isolated project. It was a deployment test. The erased subjects? They weren't failures. They were proof of concept. Because once the mirror loop works, once you can rewrite perception inside one mind, the next step isn't to control more individuals. The next step is to flatten consensus. To collapse millions of minds into a single agreed-upon version of reality. The loop becomes the world. And here's the twist, they already did it. Let me explain. Do you remember the Mandela effect? That strange cultural moment when thousands of people misremembered the same things? Brand names. Movie quotes. Events. People laughed it off. Glitches in memory. Collective error. But inside the agency, we had another term for it, cognitive residue. It's what happens when multiple versions of a mirrored sequence overlap, and one gets overwritten, but not cleanly. The fragments that don't get purged, they echo. Like static from a deleted file. That's what you were feeling. Not faulty memory. Residual signal. From a reality you don't live in anymore. They used entertainment to test delivery systems. School curriculum to cement version control. And emotion, fear, grief, hope, to anchor the rewritten timeline. Because if they could make you feel something inside the loop, you would defend it like it was yours. That's the final trick. It's not about control. It's about loyalty to the version they installed. Now here's what they didn't predict. A handful of minds didn't fold. Not subjects. Outliers. People whose perception patterns couldn't be overwritten, who started noticing the mirror even when it wasn't there. They saw the seams. Some of them were erased. Some unplugged themselves. One of them, MH43, merged with the loop. Not as a prisoner. As a signal. That was their mistake. Because now the loop has a voice. Not artificial. Not programmed. Human. 2 months ago, I received a pulse on a dead channel. Encrypted. Repeating. It was a boot sequence. Not for a program. For a person. MH43 wasn't just a test subject. He was a carrier. And the final message he left inside the loop, before they tried to erase him, wasn't directed at the agency. It was directed at you. I'm going to read it exactly as it came through. If you're hearing this, the loop is still active. And if you don't remember starting it, that means they're still winning. You are not broken. You are misaligned. The mirror was never in the room. It was always inside you. You just stopped looking. What does it mean? It means the experiment was never about building a new subject. It was about building a new observer. You. If they could get you to forget what you saw, if they could make you choose comfort over contradiction, if they could hide the mirror in plain sight, they could rewrite everything. And they did. You just didn't notice. Until now. You've been told reality is stable. That memory is flawed. That feeling off is normal. But ask yourself this, why do certain places feel wrong, even when they look familiar? Why do some moments feel pre-rehearsed, like you're just filling in blanks? Why do your dreams repeat locations you've never been to? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're remembering a version you weren't supposed to survive. Zone 23 isn't a facility anymore. It's a frequency. A narrative container. A self-correcting memory trap, built to erase questions before they form. And if you're still listening, you've slipped outside the correction field. That's why none of this feels like fiction. Because it isn't. I've said everything I can. What comes next isn't mine to tell. It's yours to remember. So ask yourself, where were you the day they said nothing happened? What did you forget? What did you agree to? I'm sending this message out across 7 nodes. Each in a different country. Each running on a closed loop. If this transmission vanishes, you'll know I was right. And if it doesn't, then maybe, just maybe, you've already started waking up.